What if they told you that you stole millions without ever touching a penny? You wake up one morning, drink your coffee, check your emails, get ready for another day of work, but suddenly, the violent sound of knocking on the door changes everything. Police raid his home with an arrest warrant. In a matter of minutes, your life is turned upside down. Serious accusations, screams, handcuffs, and the only thing you can say is, "This must be a mistake." But it's not, at least not for the system. And that's exactly what happened to Daniel Castro, a 22-year-old young man, brilliant in technology, passionate about cybersecurity, one of those rare talents who could change the world with a few lines of code, about to embark on an international career with a guaranteed position in one of the largest technology companies in the world. He had the world at his feet until that day. Accused of committing a multi-million-dollar digital fraud against the government, Daniel saw everything he built crumble in a matter of hours. The police claimed to have concrete evidence, malicious code files, records of access to federal servers, bank accounts abroad in his name. The media was quick to label him the hacker of the century. Public opinion cried out for justice, and no one, absolutely no one, seemed willing to hear his version of events. After all, data doesn't lie, or does it? Daniel swore his innocence. He said he never saw that information, that he never accessed any system involved. But the digital evidence was there: prints, logs, IPs, incriminating emails, all extremely convincing. Details so specific that even doubters began to remain silent. How could anyone simulate such technical perfection? For the justice system, there was no doubt. He was guilty. And that was how Daniel was sentenced to 16 years in prison, without the right to the truth, without the right to doubt. The most terrifying thing is that he was not convicted based on testimony, security, or cameras or physical evidence. No, what took him to rock bottom were just digital files, lines of code, data that could be manipulated with one click, and in his case they were. Now imagine if everything you are, everything you do, is stored in systems, in digital records. What stops someone from using it against you? How far does trust in technology go when it itself can be the perfect weapon for a trap? Stay with me, because this story goes far beyond a miscarriage of justice. She delves into a universe where the truth can be written by those who have access to the right system, and where a simple act of personal revenge can turn into a digital life sentence. If this story has already left you with a heavy heart, if at some point you imagined yourself in Daniel's place, alone, wronged, labeled for a crime you never committed, then this video needs to reach more people. Leave your like now and subscribe to the channel, because every gesture you make helps give a voice to those who have been silenced. Here, the truth is not ignored, it is told, and what comes next is even more disturbing. Daniel Castro was not just another young man passionate about technology. At 22 years old, he was already considered a prodigy in the world of programming. Since he was a child, he demonstrated an unusual curiosity. He disassembled old electronics, read advanced books on digital security before even finishing high school, and at 18, he had already developed protection tools that caught the attention of experts in the sector. He was the type of person who inspired confidence, a good genius, as his teachers and friends used to say. He never had any problems with the law. He was never involved in scandals or confusion. He was disciplined, focused, dedicated. His story was one that makes parents dream. The suburban boy, raised with sacrifice by a single mother, about to change his life thanks to talent, effort, and an opportunity earned with merit. He had just been approved in a competitive selection process for a cybersecurity multinational. He already had tickets purchased, a letter of acceptance for a scholarship abroad, and he was at the height of his excitement about the future that was shaping up. It was one of those rare moments when everything seems to finally align. He was making plans to rent a small apartment abroad, send money to his mother every month, and maybe even fulfill her long-time dream of opening a small computer store in the neighborhood where they grew up. His friends congratulated him, his teachers praised him, and even the local press mentioned him as an example of the new Brazilian tech generation. Nothing, absolutely nothing in his career pointed to any involvement in digital crimes. It was ironic to think about it, because precisely because he was so good at protecting systems, Daniel always had a strong sense of responsibility. He believed that technology should serve people, not be used as a weapon. This ethical vision, in fact, was what stood out to him in the tests of the company that would hire him. They were looking for someone with technical intelligence, but also with principles. And he was exactly that. Smart, yes, ambitious too, but above all, integrity. It was impossible to imagine that in a matter of days, this young man with such a promising future would become the face on the country's cruelest headlines, that he would be seen not as an example, but as a digital villain, a sophisticated criminal who would have defrauded the system with surgical precision. But how could you believe that, when everything he had built up to that point was based on trust, dedication, and truth? It was difficult to accept. Difficult to understand. It was impossible to predict the size of the trap that was about to close on him. That morning, everything seemed absolutely normal. The sun was shining through the crack in the curtain. Daniel was still dreaming about his plans to move abroad, and his mother was preparing coffee in the kitchen as she did every day. But the calm was interrupted by a dry, urgent, violent sound. Loud knocks on the door, followed by voices that shouted his full name, demanding that he open it. Still drowsy and confused, Daniel stumbled through the hallways of the small apartment to the door, having no idea what was about to happen. When he turned the doorknob, he was immediately pushed away by armed men wearing federal police vests, who invaded his house as if they were dealing with an international terrorist. He was thrown against the wall, handcuffed before his mother's terrified eyes, while another group searched the place with haste and brutality. Within minutes, their computers, hard drives, pen drives, and even the router were seized. Daniel tried to understand, in the midst of panic, the reason for that operation. It was only when he heard the words misappropriation of public funds, digital fraud, invasion of government systems, that reality began to become a nightmare. The agents informed him that there was an arrest warrant issued for involvement in a cyber attack that diverted millions of reais from an account linked to a state-owned infrastructure company. He could barely breathe. I had never had any connection with that company. He never even accessed a government system, let alone stole millions. And even in the face of chaos, all he could say over and over was, "This is a mistake, I didn't do anything." But no, one seemed willing to listen. For the police, he was a clear and direct target. The warrant already mentioned his name as the mastermind behind the coup. And the most shocking thing was yet to come. Upon being taken to the police station, Daniel was confronted with supposed irrefutable evidence. Screen prints showing access to protected servers, copies of malicious code allegedly created by him, transactions made to accounts that were in his name, and even encrypted emails threatening government officials. Everything so well put together, so convincing, that even an inattentive expert would believe it. But for Daniel, it was like being trapped inside a fictional film, a film where he was the villain, even without understanding the script. The most painful thing was realizing that even though he swore his innocence, no one there seemed to doubt his guilt. The investigators' gazes were already full of judgment. The way they referred to him in the reports as the person mainly responsible for the attack made it clear that the decision had already been made, even before any hearing. In that cold room, surrounded by faces that offered him no empathy, Daniel realized he wasn't just being accused, he was being condemned. And little did he know that that would be just the first step towards the biggest nightmare of his life. At the police station, the atmosphere was full of tension, as if Daniel's mere presence there represented a threat. He was placed in a cold room with 2 white walls and 2 hard chairs, and left there for long minutes, as if time there was used as a tool of psychological torture. When the investigator finally entered, he was carrying a thick, heavy folder and the expression of someone who already knew the truth. "We have everything we need, Daniel," he said, with the confidence of someone who believes he is facing someone to blame. On the table, he spread pages with screen prints, logs of access to restricted systems, malicious source, codes written in languages that Daniel recognized but would never have written. It all seemed so real, so well designed, that for a moment he even questioned his sanity. How could such detailed documents have been generated? They were complex files that appeared to have come directly from his own machines. Files with his name, times when he supposedly accessed servers, IPs that matched his home location. But he knew, deep down, that none of it was true. With each new print presented, Daniel felt as if he was watching a distorted version of his own life. There were emails exchanged with alleged accomplices in which he discussed figures, targets, and even escape routes. In one of the documents, there was a transaction of 5 million reais made to an account in his name in a tax haven. And as if that weren't enough, the investigators also showed logs from the banking system, proving that the money went through several layers of encryption before reaching its final destination. Everything was extremely technical, detailed, and totally foreign to him. The most disturbing thing was that, despite being an expert in digital security, Daniel was unable to identify flaws or inconsistencies in the evidence. It was as if they were made to look perfect, as if they had been planted by someone who knew the system inside out, someone who knew exactly how to simulate a convincing digital trail. He tried to argue, explain that he had never written those lines of code, that he had never accessed any of those servers, but it was like talking to a wall. The police were convinced, and worse, the media, which soon found out about the arrest, already painted him as a digital criminal genius. Within hours, his face was plastered across news portals, TV shows, and social media. Hacker of the century, they said. The boy who stole millions with one click. The narrative was formed, and he found himself cornered on all sides. No authority seemed interested in hearing his version. No experts were called in to audit the systems or verify the authenticity of the data. Justice seemed to trust blindly in the supposed integrity of digital evidence, as if that, in itself, was infallible. But Daniel knew, perhaps better than anyone, that any data, any digital trace, could be manipulated with surgical precision, and he was beginning to realize that he was in front of someone who knew exactly how to do this. The trial was more of a spectacle than a search for the truth. In that crowded room, where the cameras multiplied and the eyes seemed thirsty for a culprit, Daniel entered handcuffed, wearing the beige uniform that symbolized everything he was not. The silence that fell when he walked through the door was not one of respect, but of judgment. A heavy silence that screamed without sound. The prosecution began its presentation with sharp sentences, full of technical terms that seemed unstoppable. Intrusion, diversion, encrypted protocol, unauthorized transfer. They pointed to Daniel as if he were a master of digital crime, a cold, meticulous, dangerous hacker. Each print, each code, each supposed transaction was displayed on screens as if it were a visual sentence. The prosecutor looked directly at the jury and said, in a firm voice, "The digital evidence does not lie. He left a trail, and it is on this trail that justice rests." Daniel's lawyer did his best. He tried to explain that all of this could have been manipulated, that logs can be forged, that metadata can be easily changed by someone who knows what they are doing. It even brought in an independent expert who raised legitimate doubts about the integrity of the files. But no one wanted to listen. The court wasn't there to question the technology. It was there to punish someone, and everyone had already decided who that would be. The narrative of a traitorous genius was too irresistible to be dismantled with technical arguments. And Daniel with his lost gaze and withdrawn posture, was the perfect character for this role. He had already been condemned by public opinion even before the official sentence. The media did its part with cruelty disguised as journalism. Bombastic headlines took over the networks. The hacker of millions, the young man who humiliated national security, digital traitor. Talk shows exploited his image, memes went viral, and his personal life was scoured down to the last detail. Childhood friends disappeared. The family itself began to remain silent, fearing the repercussions. The court, pressured by all this avalanche, just went with the flow. The verdict came quickly, dryly, mercilessly. Guilty. 16 years in prison. Daniel heard the sentence without reaction, as if his body was present, but his soul had already been ripped out. There were no screams, there were no tears, just the sound of a hammer sealing his fate and the buzz of the audience who seemed to have watched a satisfactory show. And in that instant, Daniel understood that it wasn't just his freedom that had been taken from him. It was his identity, his truth, and everything he believed in that protected him. If you've made it this far, tell me one thing honestly. What would you feel if you were judged for something you never did, without anyone by your side to hear your truth? Comment below with a single word that defines this feeling. It could be injustice, powerlessness, or even anger. I'm going to read every single comment because this story isn't just about Daniel. It's about everyone who has ever been silenced by a system that refuses to listen. Within the cold walls of the maximum security penitentiary, Daniel became more than a prisoner. He became a distorted symbol of what the media had created. The hacker who stole from the government was now just a number, a face marked by suspicious looks, silent hatred, and open contempt. The other inmates did not see a young man being wronged. They saw a threat, someone who messed with the system, who thought he was too smart. This made Daniel a target. In the first month, he was attacked twice for no reason, just for what they believed he was. No guard intervened, no colleague defended him. There, he was guilty, period. The letters he sent to his friends came back unanswered. Calls were ignored, visits cancelled. The family, devastated by shame and social pressure, began to move away. His elderly parents did not know how to deal with the exposure, and his older brother, who previously supported him, asked him to wait for time to pass. Daniel was sinking into an absolute void. The days dragged by like decades, and the metallic sound of the cell doors closing was the only reminder that he was still alive. It was in this suffocating silence that a doubt began to grow within him. What if it had all been premeditated? If someone with real motivation and technical access had planted every piece of digital evidence, every code, every trace left like a calculated trap? Daniel was not naive. I knew how the virtual underworld worked. I knew that data manipulation was not only possible, it was common among the most skilled. And the more I thought, the more certain details began to hurt. The precision of the evidence, the speed of the process, the total abandonment. It was as if someone had planned each step with surgical coolness. But who would do that? And why? He went back through each memory before prison, trying to find a loose piece in this puzzle. And there, in the back of his mind, a memory insisted on reappearing. Helena. The name echoed in his sleepless nights, along with phrases he wanted to forget. You will regret it. Nobody really knows you. I will show the world who you are. In the past, he thought they were words spoken in the heat of a breakup, nothing more. But now they seemed like omens. Daniel didn't know which was worse, the crushing loneliness of prison or the growing fear that his life had been destroyed by someone he once loved. And it was in this abyss of uncertainty, surrounded by walls that echoed his own despair, that he swore to himself, if there was still some truth out there, he would find it. Because doubt could even imprison your body, but no one could quench the thirst for justice. Amid the dark walls of the cell, where daylight barely touched and time seemed to have stopped, Daniel immersed himself in his own memories, as if looking for oxygen in a sea of despair. Every conversation, every call, every detail of the days leading up to his arrest was revisited with an almost obsessive precision. And the more he relived those moments, the more one name came back to the surface. Helena, your ex-girlfriend. Her face, once full of affection and complicity, now appeared in his mind with shadows of resentment like a poisoned memory. They had lived an intense relationship marked by passion, yes, but also by crises, jealousy, and constant distrust. And the ending was anything but peaceful. He remembered the cold tone she used on their last date, the way her eyes seemed to hide something. She didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just looked straight and said, "You will pay for abandoning me." At the time, he laughed nervously, thinking it was breakup drama. But now every word seemed like a warning, a promise that was cruelly and silently fulfilled. Still, thinking that Helena would have any connection to her arrest seemed absurd. She was an ordinary woman. She had no involvement with technology. She never showed interest in this world, but the strange feeling that everything had been calculated down to the millimeter forced him to question everything, including her. Daniel began to mentally reconstruct the timeline of everything he experienced with Helena. He remembered strange moments, that time when she asked to quickly look at her computer, saying she needed to respond to an urgent email, the day she saw a browser tab open with digital security, forums, and she said it was just curiosity, or even when she insisted that he not use antivirus because it only slowed down the system. Small episodes that previously seemed irrelevant now gained a new weight, a new color. Would she have used the access she had to plant something? Or worse, to pass on your passwords to someone more experienced? In prison, Daniel had no access to evidence, emails, or digital traces. All he had was his own memory and the restlessness that grew inside him like an open wound. The only certainty he carried was that the evidence in the process had emerged too quickly, in an absurd quantity, and with a technical perfection that he himself would have difficulty reproducing. It was as if someone knew exactly where to hit, how to manufacture every detail. What if that person was closer than he imagined? If in fact the reason for everything was rooted in something as human and destructive as the revenge of a broken heart? With this idea throbbing in his mind, Daniel realized that perhaps the biggest mistake of his life was not trusting the system, but rather trusting too much in those who swore to love him. And now, every memory of Helena stopped being just a memory and became a possible piece of the puzzle that ruined her existence. On the other side of the bars, while Daniel remained cloistered in his dark routine of distrust and silence, a new piece discreetly came into play, and it had the potential to turn the entire board around. His name was Rafael Montenegro, an investigative journalist known for going where no one else dared. When an anonymous contact sent him a digital dossier titled, "You are looking in the wrong place," he had no idea he was about to be embroiled in one of the biggest digital evidence manipulation scandals of the decade. Rafael had already investigated corruption, data trafficking, and even corporate espionage, but nothing compared to what began to emerge in the case of Daniel Castro. He read every page of the file, analyzed every technical report, and immediately noticed something that the court's experts ignored or chose not to see. The logs presented as evidence against Daniel were duplicated at millimetrically identical intervals, something that, for any security expert, was a clear sign of manipulation. With each line of code, Rafael found flaws that were too subtle for lay eyes, but glaring for those who knew the behind-the-scenes of cybersecurity. The IPs allegedly linking Daniel to the crime were connected to proxy servers in suspicious locations, as if someone had intentionally routed the tracks to appear legitimate. Everything was too clean, too organized, and in the world of digital crime, perfection almost always means scam. It was at this point that he decided to consult his riskiest sources, ethical hackers, insiders, and even underworld informants, and the name appeared almost like a whisper in binary code, Z3R0. Z3R0 was a legend, an anonymous hacker known on the darkest forums for breaking into government systems, manipulating judicial databases, and disappearing without a trace. But Raphael wasn't dealing with a ghost. A sequence of digital signatures, almost imperceptible traces left by vanity or daring, revealed a pattern, and this pattern appeared exactly in the files attached to Daniel's case. That couldn't be a coincidence. Raphael crossed data, checked old forums, accessed networks that had already been erased from the surface, and in a moment of pure instinct, researched a connection between Z3R0 and Helena. That's when he found an encrypted comment on a closed forum posted years before. "Never mess with someone who knows your past." The comment was signed by an account associated with Helena and responded to by a profile that used the same login hash already linked to Z3R0. That line of code was more than a clue. It was a bomb waiting to explode. Raphael knew that, if that were confirmed, the narrative of the case would change forever. What's more, it would prove that Daniel was not the criminal genius that the media portrayed, but rather the perfect victim of a revenge as cold as the screen of a hacker terminal. And at that moment, with his eyes fixed on the screen, the journalist understood. Someone had manipulated the truth, and now he was about to expose it. If you've made it this far, I need you to tell me something. How far do you believe someone would go for revenge? This story is just beginning to reveal what was hidden behind the mask of justice. And your opinion may be more important than you realize. Comment the word below "injustice" if you believe that Daniel was the victim of a corrupted system. Or write "manipulated" if you feel like this was all meticulously engineered to destroy someone innocent. I want to see how many of you can feel the weight of this truth. The journalist's discoveries were like shrapnel from a bomb that no one saw explode. Deep within an old digital underworld forum, he found what would change everything. Encrypted conversations between Helena and the hacker, known only as Z3R0. The messages, initially cold, became increasingly intimate, almost complicit, until they reached a point that would make anyone shiver. Helena wrote in all letters, "I want him to pay. Promise me you will destroy Daniel." And Z3R0 responded with something even more disturbing. "Trust me, no one will know. I'll make everything perfect." Here was the naked, cruel, digitized truth. A hoax carefully staged for revenge, a cold manipulation of the system, a crime committed with lines of code, but which ruined an entire life. The hacker had actually broken into the judicial system, inserting fake files, forged logs, and even emails that never existed, all with a level of sophistication that would fool even the most experienced experts. And that's exactly what happened. The judge, the prosecutors, the security experts, everyone was manipulated. None of them even considered that the truth could be poisoned from the root. Daniel was not only the victim of a lie, he was the victim of a plan that circumvented all barriers of justice, all guarantees of truth. The journalist, upon realizing the scale of what he had in his hands, felt his blood run cold. It wasn't just about Daniel, it was about an entire system exposed by a simple human error, relying too much on digital evidence without ever questioning it. And the most disturbing? There was still more. Because Helena didn't do it alone, and Z3R0 never left a trace. Hell seemed to have no end. Even with the evidence out in the open, even with the messages between Helena and the hacker revealing the setup, the system refused to give in. Daniel's defense, now reinforced by lawyers committed to the truth, brought every fragment of the fraud to justice. Forged logs, manipulated codes, connections with the hacker Z3R0, everything. But on the other side, a deafening silence hovered in the institutions, admitting That an innocent person had been convicted by evidence planted within the judicial system itself was admitting that anyone could be next. It was recognizing a structural flaw that put the credibility of the entire digital justice system at risk. Therefore, the request for criminal review was denied, then denied again and again. Daniel, even outside of isolation, remained imprisoned, this time due to an institutional pride that preferred to keep an innocent man incarcerated rather than expose his vulnerability. There were 3 years of court battles, ignored appeals, and sleepless nights. But public pressure began to grow. The journalist who revealed the hoax brought the case to light on international networks. Public opinion, previously an executioner, began to question, "What if it were me?" Protests erupted, reports demanded answers, and that's when finally a gap appeared. A federal judge, known for his relentless stance, decided to take the case. Not out of compassion, but because he saw a symbol there, a chance to reform something much bigger than Daniel's case. Announcing the reopening of the case, he said, "If digital evidence can be planted, our obligation is to reevaluate what we consider to be true." Daniel, for the first time in years, breathed hope. But he knew that freedom was still a distant promise. When Daniel finally walked through the prison gates, the sky seemed bigger, the air thicker, and the silence heavier than ever. He was free, at least from the concrete and the bars. But there was no crowd applauding, no hugs from justice, no headlines apologizing, just lonely steps towards a world that has forgotten him. 9 years of his life had been taken away by a meticulously planned lie, but even that was not enough to generate punishment. The hacker who destroyed your life has disappeared from the map. Helena, despite explicit messages and articulation with Z3R0, was never formally accused. There is a lack of indisputable technical evidence, they claimed. The state, in turn, continued as if nothing had happened. No compensation, no apology, no public acknowledgement of monstrous failure. Society, which previously judged him without hesitation, now just looked away. Daniel returned to a world that went on without him, to a life that no longer fit into his dreams. And deep down, he carried a crushing certainty. His freedom was just an illusion. He was released, yes, but never truly freed. And the cruelest of all, the thing is, even after the truth came to light, he continued to pay for a crime he never committed. Daniel didn't want to become a symbol of anything. He dreamed of a simple life, of genuine freedom, of the chance to apply his talent to building, not defending himself. But destiny gave him another role, that of being living proof that the system, when combined with malicious technology, can become a devastating weapon. His face made headlines for the wrong reasons, and years later for reasons that would never erase the first ones. His name became a case study, debates in law schools, seminars on cyber crimes. But for him, none of that filled the void left by the lost years. Today, Daniel lives isolated, disconnected from the world that crushed him so hard, avoids social networks, refuses to open a computer. The sound of the keyboard, which was once music to his ears, now brings back memories he would rather bury. He carries the weight of a trauma that no absolution can erase, because it wasn't just his freedom that they took away from him, it was his trust in justice, in people, in the future. And that is where the real tragedy of this story lies. Justice, which was supposed to protect, failed in a brutal and irreversible way. If even the most sophisticated systems can be manipulated, who is really safe? How many other lives are being destroyed now in silence by invisible lines of code, by accusations based on forged data, by decisions made by those who never questioned the source of truth? Daniel's story is not just his. It's a warning, a cry that echoes amid the blind progress of the digital age. And perhaps the most frightening thing is knowing that in the world we live in, all it takes is one click to turn any innocent person into the next condemned person. If this story made you reflect, if at any point you felt angry, scared, or even powerless, then you understand how serious this is. And that's why I need you. Like, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because when the truth is silenced, every view turns into resistance. Share this story with someone who needs to understand that justice can fail, and fail badly. And get ready, because in the next video, you will discover an even darker case, a revelation so absurd it could change everything you believe about right and wrong. See you there.